Mongols National President, David Thacker, also known as JD or Jack Daniels, was a force to be reckoned with, as he pulled no punches in his quest for criminal success. From devising a far-reaching drug-running operation to raining bullets down on the home of a rival gang, he made sure his mark was made. The man who was in charge of the Mongols MC in New Zealand led them to become very powerful and famous quickly, like a shooting star. This caused a huge and intense gang war in the country, which might have been the most serious one ever. However, in a twist of fate, the very individual who once orchestrated the group's ascent to criminal glory is now grappling with a colossal and harrowing downfall of monumental proportions, just as dramatic as when they became powerful. Mongols are now losing their power and influence in a noticeable and sudden way. It's as though they soared upwards with astonishing speed, only to now plummet downward at an equal velocity, engulfed in a whirlwind of downfall. JD was arrested and so were his associates, and the club was brought down to its knees by the authorities. JD either pleaded guilty or was found guilty on a total of 53 charges, including aggravated robbery, violence, unlawfully carrying or possessing a firearm, participating in an organized criminal group, engaging in money laundering transactions, supplying, administering or dealing with methamphetamine and amphetamine, and possessing methamphetamine and amphetamine for supply. 9 senior members of the Mongols stood trial in the Hamilton High Court for drug and weapons charges resulting from police's Operation Silk. This trial was one of the biggest criminal cases in recent New Zealand history and began more than 2 years after the initial police operation. The trial has concluded with all of them being sentenced in the same court, receiving lengthy prison terms. Thacker's sentencing took place on Friday the 18th August and he was jailed for 22 years and 4 months. This marked a dramatic turnaround for the man who had become the public face of Mongols New Zealand, a ruthless club that had been linked to drug dealing, extortion, and violence. In August 2018, Thacker was sent back to New Zealand from Australia, which is exactly 5 years from the date of his sentencing, under the controversial 501 legislation. He had been living in Australia since the age of 4. Australian authorities took notice of him due to his significant involvement in the infamous 2013 bikie brawl in Broadbeach on the Gold Coast. Thacker was sentenced to 150 hours community service in Australia in 2014 for rioting, and then deported 4 years later. With a keen business sense and a charismatic personality, he had successfully set up a motorcycle repair business in Australia. This is how he got involved with bikies, the first bikie club being the Highway 61s, and later the Bandidos. Thacker rose quickly through bikie ranks, and by the time he was kicked out of Australia, he had become the president of the Bandidos Beenleigh chapter. When he landed in New Zealand, he wanted to set up Bandidos New Zealand, however the plan did not work out and he was booted out. A falling out with the Australian hierarchy led him to rebrand himself under the Mongols. With fellow deportees Hune Ranaki and Leon Huritu, he set about establishing a chapter of the Mongols Motorcycle Club in the Bay of Plenty. Under Thacker's leadership, dozens of kilograms of methamphetamine was sourced in Auckland, taken to the Bay of Plenty to be washed, and then sent onwards to other parts of the country for distribution and sale. However, the drug trade and expansion was not that easy. As in the heart of the Bay of Plenty, notorious powerhouse clubs like the Mongrel Mob and the Greasy Dogs stood their ground, fiercely resisting the audacious advances of the Mongols into the lucrative realm of the region's drug trade. The Mongols' chaotic crusade to assert their supremacy over the area ignited a tempestuous chain of events, a house being riddled with bullets from high-powered weaponry, and pitched gun battles in the orchard lands west of North Island. However, the Mongols' swift rise to dominance was halted, first by the initial COVID outbreak and lockdown in March 2020, and then when police swooped on their senior hierarchy in June of that year. The police crackdown was followed by a further blow when the High Court jury found the club leaders guilty of a slew of violence, firearms and drugs charges in November last year. Thacker was arrested in June 2019, amid tit-for-tat war, with rival gangs involving arson and drive-by shootings. A loaded Magnum handgun was found in his car when he was arrested. He was also charged with aggravated robbery of a rival gang member allegedly taking his gang sweatshirt at knife point. When the trial started, the group is defending 118 charges related to drug dealing and supply, firearms, aggravated robbery and money laundering. The Crown claimed that they were responsible for the commercial supply of drugs throughout New Zealand and were involved in tit-for-tat shootings with rival clubs. The club allegedly obtained, distributed and broke down quantities of drugs and sold them for profit. They used the firearms to service that drug trade. They were regularly in possession of firearms and they weren't afraid to use them to ensure the rival clubs in the Bay of Plenty knew they were in town and knew they were here to stay. They rapidly established a violent criminal group, club and drug enterprise and only came to a halt when police executed Operation Silk in June 2020. Police intercepted communications including phone calls and text messages between December 2019 and May 2020. Police also had an audio device in Thacker's home. Thacker tried to avoid getting his hands dirty by limiting what he primarily did with the drugs, but he directed and controlled his members, including when it came to ordering violent retaliation against mongrel mob and greasy dog members. Thacker also ran the Bladed and Faded barber shop, but on January 26, 2020, a glass door was smashed and the following night it was burned down in an arson attack. That sparked a shooting of a mongrel mob house in Howcourt Street, ordered by Thacker, in which 96 rounds of ammunition were fired at the house. The mongrel mob retaliated with several carloads of members heading to Ranaki's house, where a gangland-type shooting took place. Crown's evidence also showed how the gang's drug pricing worked, with surveillance discussions revealing 10 ounces of P was worth $50,000 and 3 ounces were worth $6,000 each. Operation Silk was wrapped on June 23, 2020, when police executed a series of search warrants and arrests. Thacker was charged in 2020, and placed in Waikaria prison on remand. He was then transferred to Auckland Prison on October 9, 2020, where he was managed by the Prisoners of Extreme Risk Unit, and in September of the same year, Thacker was placed on directed segregation after he displayed violence towards another prisoners. This means that his time spent in prison has been mostly under segregated isolation and cell confinement. Jim David Thacker, 33, was jailed for 22 years and 4 months when he appeared in the High Court in Hamilton. It was a sentencing that took place in the presence of anguished family members and angered supporters, who appeared to be taken by surprise by the length of his sentence. Justice Melanie Harlan ordered a minimum period of incarceration of 50%. Under current legislation, this means it will be a maximum of 10 years before he can be considered for parole. Thacker's sentencing followed that of his immediate deputy and vice president Hune Ranaki, who received a jail term of 16 years on firearms and drug charges. Leon the Wolf Huritu, 40, the club's sergeant-at-arms who also took part in the shooting, was also sentenced to 7 years and 2 months. 11 other leaders and members of the Mongols were sentenced in June, including Jason 666 Ross, the head of the South Island chapter, who incurred a 12-year jail term, and Hawke's Bay boss Kelly Rhino Petrovsky, who received a stretch of 10 years and 2 months. The conclusion of Thacker's story reveals the swift and dramatic shift from criminal prominence to a lengthy prison sentence. In the courtroom, everyone saw that he didn't expect to feel so emotional, and he looked really surprised by how serious his punishment was. Through his sentencing, Thacker's reign as the public figurehead of the Mongols in New Zealand draws to a close, underscoring the undeniable cycle of fluctuating criminal influence and the ensuing outcomes it carries. His era as the face of the Mongols in New Zealand has come to an end, or one could say, at the very least, for a duration of 10 years.